Good evening, everyone. David Freiheit, episode 5 of Viva PPC, documenting my journey running for the People's Party of Canada for the riding of Westmount and Notre-Dame-de-Grâce. For anybody wondering about the backdrop, I'm staying at a Best Western tonight. This is the last night of the road trip that I've been on with my family, and it's been an amazing road trip. We've traveled through Quebec, through New Brunswick, to Deer Island, to Grand Manan, and I've been talking to Quebecers, to New Brunswickers, to Canadians, just getting a feel for the land, a feel for their concerns, not trying to sway them or pressure them politically, just to hear what people have to say. And very timely discussions I've been having with people. Today on Twitter, I saw a post. It was a link to a USA Today article. The headline of this article was, "When should liberty yield to the public good?" To which I tweeted, "Liberty is the greater good." And anybody thinking that the greater good involves suppression or yielding of liberty is putting the carriage in front of the horse. And I say this at a time now where in Quebec, the François Legault government is talking about implementing a vaccine passport. Just let this all sink in to everybody now. It was 2 weeks to flatten the curve a year and a half ago, and now we've gone to vaccine passports. 2 weeks to flatten the curve so as not to overwhelm the healthcare system. And a year and a half to 2 years later, we are now talking about requiring people to get vaccinated in order for the government to confer to them certain privileges. And I'm not using abstract terms here. I am quoting François Legault. He says, and he said it today, "There's no reason why people who made an effort to get vaccinated should be denied privileges such that those who do get vaccinated will be granted privileges." I made a joke on Twitter that, when the government takes your rights away, they're called rights, and by the time the discussion comes to return those rights to you, the government has transformed them into privileges. They literally take your rights away. And then when you say, "Hey, can I have those rights back?" they say, "What rights? Those are just privileges. The privilege of leaving your house, the privilege of not wearing a face mask in high school if you're a kid." Privileges. When rights become privileges, you go from a free society to a tyrannical society. And that is where we are heading as, at the very least, a Quebec society. But Justin Trudeau of the federal government is supporting François Legault's oppression and usurpation of our fundamental constitutional rights and liberties. And the funny thing is, I talk to people on the street. I talk to people who are wearing face masks outside, who are wearing face masks inside. I know their concerns. I know their fears. I know why they're doing what they're doing. But when you have a discussion with them for a few more minutes, you can get past those fears and you get to a point where people do realize that we are losing our fundamental rights. We are literally losing our way of life. And we're losing it not out of necessity, but out of convenience. Because when I said this before and people don't fully appreciate it, the 2 weeks to flatten the curve, we have known for decades that we have had a strained healthcare system. A strained healthcare system that pre-pandemic was overloaded during flu seasons, 2018, earlier, overloaded during the flu seasons at the peak levels. This has been the case for decades. So when the pandemic hit, it strained an already strained healthcare system. That was what the 2 weeks to flatten the curve was about. It was to flatten the curve so as not to overwhelm the healthcare systems. And we've gotten there and then some. In fact, we actually got a little further than that, because what ended up happening is nobody was going to the hospitals. Nobody was going for elective surgeries. And I've talked to people. Some of these hospitals were empty because people would have otherwise gone to hospitals for certain things that they would never now go to the hospital for, if for nothing else, fear of contracting COVID at the hospitals. But it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve so as not to overwhelm the healthcare systems. A year and a half later, 2 years later, it is not forced vaccination because nobody is pinning you down on the streets yet to do this. But it's forced vaccinations in that if you don't get them, the government is going to deny you privileges. Setting aside the demographic discussion of the vaccination debate and whether or not denying privileges to certain demographics who are more than others not vaccinated, setting aside that question, especially come from the party who say that they are pro-minority rights, anti-racist, and so on and so forth, setting aside that entire question, which is a very legitimate, very serious question, we're getting to the point now where the government is literally saying they're going to deny you privileges unless you get double vaccinated. This is not a country with a constitution. This is not a country that respects fundamental rights and freedoms, but above all else, this is not a country with a government that assumes the consequences of their own mistakes. We had a healthcare system that was strained for years. We have been in a pandemic for going on 2 years now. What has the government done in the meantime, in the last 2 years, to ramp up our healthcare system, to remedy some of the historical problems that we had already known affected it? What have they done? François Legault government has spent $150 million a year, $13 million a month on COVID ads, COVID awareness. But when you're spending $150 million a year on advertising of the problem and not solving the problem, you can question where the problem actually lies and what the government is able to do to actually remedy the problem. The problem might have been COVID to some extent, but the bigger problem was always our underlying overwhelmed healthcare system. And the government, being what it is, instead of fixing the actual problem, put a little Band-Aid, spend $150 million on advertising while telling the hospitals to cut back on their costs. Ironic, but unbelievable, yet believable. And what ends up happening at the end of the day? The government, in order to cover for their own mistakes, cover for their own inabilities to govern properly, now come in with even more stringent rules for the citizenry. Vaccination, in order for you to get back some of your privileges, which were fundamental rights that were taken from you in the first place. And you know what the problem is? There's only one party that is really objecting to this, and that is the People's Party of Canada. And they are being demonized. We are being demonized as being anti-vaxxers, despite the fact that some of us, present company included, have gotten vaccinated. But we are now being called anti-vaxxers if we oppose a vaccine passport, if we oppose predicating your rights, not your privileges, your rights on compelled vaccination, because that's what this is. This is compelled vaccination, because when people deprive you of your rights in order to get you to do something, that is called compulsion, that is called coercion, that is called vitiating consent. And that is exactly what the government is doing right now in order to compel people to get this vaccine under the pretext that it's going to solve the problems when they know darn well it's not going to, because the underlying problem of the healthcare system is still going to be there. They will have done nothing to remedy that problem. All they will have done is spent $150 million in ads, in COVID awareness ads. The sole purpose of that is to buy off the media and to ensure that the media becomes dependent on that COVID advertising revenue so that they no longer question the government under the fear that the government pulls those ads revenues from these legacy media outlets that need the money, and they then become beholden to the message of the government, and we lose both our freedoms, our media, and the government just goes on being irresponsible. Okay, with that said, stay tuned for episode 6. If you want to support the party and support my run for office, links are in the pinned comment. But most importantly, to leave you with a bit of optimism, a lot more people think like me than are out there being vocal, and there will come a point at which it will become cool to become vocal and to start saying enough is enough, we have rights, and the government cannot take away our rights under the pretext, under the promise, the endless moving goalposts that you will get your freedoms back when. It's the end of it. We're going to get our freedoms back now, and the way to do that is to vote out the people who have taken your freedoms from you and to vote in the people who respect your freedoms. With that said, peace.